I must tell you, the only reason why Talia called me brilliant is because I agreed with some of the points in the discussion we had over lunch. Right. Good afternoon. I trust that you're all well on this lovely day. I'm having the graveyard session, which is always fun. Please be aware that I have a tendency to throw water bottles at people falling asleep, so I know it's not good etiquette from a speaker, but please be aware it may happen. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about something that I feel very passionate about, and that is talking about the risks of risk management. Now, that sounds funny. I mean,
speaking after lunch, maybe everybody is quiet.
Yeah. No questions. Yeah, I expect to have a very peaceful session. So, in terms of risk management, okay, before I continue, I just need to make this disclaimer. I grew up in a generation that believed that you show people respect by wearing a jacket. Unfortunately, I can't present wearing a jacket. So I brought a jacket to show you that I respect you, but I can't wear it while I'm presenting. So please bear with me as far as that's concerned. Okay, so we're going to talk about the risk of risk management in uncertain conditions. Now, we spoke about it many times today. What is a risk? And broadly speaking, a risk is anything that causes uncertainty with regards to whether you will be able to achieve your objectives. Whatever those objectives are, risk is about uncertainty in terms of, will I be able to achieve my objectives? Risk, obviously, as we heard, applies to everything. Any process in an organization, you can say, what are the risks? Anything that has an objective, you can ask the question, what could prevent this objective from being achieved? What causes uncertainty with regards to, will I be able to achieve this objective? So, risk management is a process, amongst other things. So the moment we say it's a process, it means that it has objectives. We are doing risk management for a specific reason. We want to achieve specific objectives. Now, the moment we say there's a process with objectives, it means that there's risk. So we should actually ask the question, and it's my contention that we don't ask the question enough. What are the risks inherent in risk management itself? So the outcome of risk management is optimized risk. We don't want to, it's quite often not feasible to completely eliminate the risk, but we want to bring the risk to a point where we say the risk is now commensurate to the rewards, and we are happy to accept the risk in the way it is now. So the outcome of risk is optimize the risk. There's uncertainty of, will our risk process actually provide us with optimized risk? That's the question. So it means that there is risk in terms of risk management. Now, the risks of risk management itself are known. Come on. I'm sure when I list the risks, you will say, yeah, I know about that. I knew about that. The problem is we don't always keep those risks at top of mind. And if you neglect the risk, if you know about a risk but you neglect it, it will happen sometime that it will bite you. So what I'm trying to do through today is to say, yes, you may know about these risks, but the problem is you may forget about them. You may not watch them. The mitigation that you do for your risk management risks may not be effective. Or it may be effective, and then because you forget about it, it's ineffective. So finally, we have issues in terms of risk management. Things that happen that shows us our risk management is not working. So what I'm going to do now is I identified some risks which I thought is very specific to risk management. But you are all in a unique situation. It differs from company to company. I can't prescribe, even if I wanted to, which I don't. But I can't prescribe to you, hey, you must look at these risks. You will look at my list of risks and say, come on, Jimmy. We know about this, or that's not a risk for us. Great. Because your situation is unique, I can't prescribe to you. What I try to do is just to stimulate your thinking about the risks of risk management by identifying some common risks which we get in the literature and from my personal experience. And then what I did is I gave them some catchy titles. If you want to take it seriously afterwards, you may word them more seriously in your risk register. Don't use my titles necessarily. The reason why I chose the catchy titles is to keep you awake and to be able for me to remember them better, to be honest. Okay, so let's, without further ado, look at the possible risks that you face from a risk management process. The first one is risk. What risk? The problem is success creates failure. Why do I say that? If an organization is very successful at what it does, if an organization, whether it be a government, whether it be a private company, if they do something very well, then they tend to think, okay, we know everything. We determine the reality of this business. And therefore, they may not acknowledge risks which are material to the continued existence of that company. Let me give you a few examples if you don't believe me. Who invented the digital camera? Kodak. Kodak invented the digital camera. What was the outcome? A few years later. Yeah? Kodak went belly up. They went bankrupt. Because they were so dominant in their field, which is the manufacturing and processing of films, they said, no, the digital camera is not a risk to us. Therefore, they couldn't even see this as a risk. It went below their radar. Therefore, one of the biggest risks is that the organization may be functionally unable to identify a material risk. Therefore, they have blind spots. They don't want to see that. And if you want to, I can give you more and more examples, but I know you want to be home before midnight, so I'll just carry on. The mitigation for this, and for each of the risk factors, I basically try to say, what could be a mitigation? Once again, whether this will work for you is entirely up to your context. But I try to think, okay, it's not good enough just to say there's a risk. What can you do about it if there's a risk? Okay, so the mitigation, the first one is paranoia. And I'm taking that's a leaf from the former CEO of Intel, Andy Grove, who basically built a culture around paranoia. He said, we must constantly be aware of threats. He actually went so far, now we can debate the ethics of that, but he went so far to set a target to his legal department and say, I want you to sue so many companies, other companies, who might potentially be a threat to us. So paranoia is required. You always have to say, somebody out there is plotting against me. Somebody out there wants to take our business. They want to take our lunch. So paranoia is the first one. And from a risk practitioner perspective, you need to encourage people to be paranoid. To say, just because you think it's not going to happen, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Second one, and that's a very important one, you need to encourage your management to support bad news. The problem is, once you become successful, nobody wants to hear bad news. We want to hide it. So, and what information does the top management get? Only the good news, only what they want to hear. And if they give an indication, we only want to hear good news, then they will only hear good news. I'm speculating now, but what information do you think did Vladimir Putin get before he decided on his military operation in Ukraine? I bet, I'm prepared to bet a lot, that the FSB gave him the information that supported his ideas. No, it's not a risk. The Ukraine will fall. The people will love the Russians coming in. So the Russian tanks rolled in with their dress uniforms packed, because in 2 weeks everything will be over. So the problem is that Putin could not see that risk, and part of that reason was there was a discouragement of bad news. So bad news and paranoia is the antidote to this risk. A second risk, and you will see some of the risks overlap. The second one is where people know about the risk, but they deliberately downplay the risk. For instance, and that's called the state of denial, which is a very big state. A lot of people live in that state of denial. So they are aware of the risk, but they refuse to take the risk seriously. The people at NASA were warned time after time about the vulnerability of the O-rings on the booster rockets of the space shuttle. They choose to ignore the risk. That's not a risk. They were warned just before the launch of the Challenger that the cold actually worsens the risk. No, that's no risk. We all know what happened to the Challenger. So there's a risk, but no, we don't think this is a risk. It can't be a risk. Denying the seriousness of the risk. Mitigation, once again, paranoia, bad news, black hats. If you're familiar with the work of de Bono says there are different hats that people wear in a group. There's a red hat for emotion, there's a white hat, there's a blue hat. But a black hat is somebody who's always questioning, who's negative. If you don't tolerate bad hat or black hats in your organization, if you don't counsel your executive, your board, to cultivate black hats, you are facing a serious risk in terms of risk management, that risks will be known, but no, that's not a risk. That's not going to happen. Okay, next one. Whose risk is this anyway? Okay. Who owns a risk? Who should be the owner of a risk? Management of what? You, yeah? Yeah, the manager of the area in which the risk occurs. That's the risk owner, right? We all know that, come on. We professionals in risk management, we know risk ownership is with the management. However, the risk here is if you are not very careful, then you, as the risk practitioners, end up with owning the risk. And this is a very real threat. I've seen that happening so many times. Tom Peters and Waterman wrote a book, the first management bestseller. They started an unfortunate trend of management bestsellers. The book was called In Search of Excellence. In Search of Excellence, Peters and Waterman made the statement, if you want to destroy quality in an organization, you create a quality function. Now, that sounds paradoxical. Why would creating a quality function destroy quality? The answer is very simple. Because if you have a quality function, then the line managers say, quality is not my responsibility, it's the responsibility of the quality function. We have a quality inspector. I don't have to worry about quality. The quality inspector will catch it. So the moment you create a specialized function, you create the risk of the accountability for that function, then going to a support function and not to the original risk owners. So Lewis A. Allen, in a management program almost half a century ago, said, we need to clearly distinguish there's a line responsibility and a staff responsibility. Line responsibility, who is responsible for the results? That is line responsibility. Staff responsibility, they have to provide support to the line responsibility. So, a risk management function within an organization is a staff accountability. You should be held accountable for the quality of the tools that you provide, for the quality of the advice that you provide, but you are not accountable and should never be accountable for the risk itself. Now you may say, well, that's not really an issue for us. That doesn't happen to us. Here's the problem. Let's take something like KPIs. You've got KPIs for risk, right? Good. Now you're measuring the KPIs. If the KPIs are not met, who's accountable? You as the risk function? Okay. The risk realized. You should not be accountable for the achievement of risk KPIs. You should be accountable for measuring, maybe, for reporting, but if the risk KPIs are not met, it should be asked from the risk owners. Now, see, I'm overstaying my welcome, so I'll try and be a bit quicker for the rest. We can relax now. We've got risk management. I'm sure you get the same thing with health and safety. Oh, we have a health and safety function, so we can relax about health and safety now. The problem is, this is a thing where you say the compliance to risk and safety becomes the goal. ISO 31000, compliant, tick. COSO, oh yeah, there's COSO as well, compliant, tick. That, honorable ladies and gentlemen, is never the goal. The goal is to achieve the result of reduction of risk. So the compliance in itself is not the goal. It's a measure that you can use, but it can and should never be the goal in itself. So what is the mitigation of that? Keys, keep it simple. I still see in many risk policies and residual risk and inherent risk, and inherent risk, you need to strip everything. Come on. Just make it simple enough so that it will achieve the objective. Don't overcomplicate it, please. And focus on the outcome. Constantly ask yourself, is what we're doing actually going to optimize risk? If it's not doing that, then don't do it. Don't do it just for the sake of saying, I'm compliant. Right, you see. So, now, let's see if you can spot the risk. In case, I'm sure you know it, but in case you don't, let me tell you. People will hide risks from you. As risk practitioners, they will hide their risks for various reasons. Obviously, one may be that they get punished if they report on the risk. The other one may be that they know that they've been remiss and they're trying to hide something and they hope that nothing will happen. Or it could be that, in some cases, criminal activity. There was a major company in South Africa who had an excellent board in terms of their knowledge of governance. They used some of the best experts in the country to do a risk assessment for them, risk management, risk register. Afterwards, it was found that the CEO engaged in highly risky deals and used some very creative accounting practices to hide that. So the company basically went under, despite all the risks. And so I thought, okay, this was clearly the risk analysis wasn't done well. But the problem is the CEO was hiding that information from everybody, including the board. So he just hid the information that would give you the risk. So how do you mitigate that? A culture of reporting, in other words, you make sure that people are not penalized for reporting a risk. As a matter of fact, you make sure that people are rewarded if they report risks. Safety example. One of the risk indicators is the number of near misses, right? But quite often, we penalize people when they report a near miss. So we should actually encourage people to report their risks. Not reporting a risk should be a capital crime, and it should be punished by execution at dawn. But reporting a risk is good. That's always good. That's the first thing, the culture. The second thing is you must use your third line of defense as much as possible, use internal audits, use other verification to try and, because you as a risk practitioner are usually reliant on information provided to you by the subject matter experts. In some cases, you may need a third line of defense to actually test the information that you're being provided by doing an audit, a real audit. We have a risk register, and it's beautiful. From this one I got from the 45th President of the United States, one Donald J. Trump. Everything was beautiful. So we have a beautiful risk register. We can show it to you. Look at it, and look at our heat map. You would like that. Look at the heat map. Quite often, that's the focus of our risk management. That is not the focus. The focus is, what do you do about the risks that have been listed in the risk register? Are those risks mitigated, or are you allowing risks in the same risks to keep in the risk register year after year? If we do the risk register, the same risk is there time after time. If that's the case, you're not doing your job as an organization. The purpose of the risk register is to be the basis for mitigating the risk. The risk register is not a goal in itself. It is a step in the process. So to mitigate, you need relentless focus on mitigation. You need to project manage the mitigation. In other words, you need to make sure there's clear accountability, there are clear deadlines, there are resources allocated if need be, and you need to make sure that your risk mitigation is measured by KPIs. The KPI should not focus on the risk register. It should focus very strongly on how many of the risks have actually been mitigated. Risk management is a risk. Now, this is a funny one. The problem is quite often when organizations implement controls to manage risks, the controls end up by causing a bigger damage than the risk that they're controlling. One of my former colleagues did a study. He said, if you buy a pen through the procurement system of the company, simple pen, let's say the cost of the pen is 1 real. Now I buy the pen through the procurement system. How much do you think it costs them to buy the pen through the procurement system, the true costs of that pen? 8. So the procurement system and all its controls that are there to prevent people from stealing pens actually inflated the cost of small cost items, of which they bought thousands, by 8 times. So you must always make sure that the risk control, that the control is appropriate to the risk, because sometimes the controls end up by costing more than the risk. Yes. Furthermore, you should always question a control. Yeah, short story. In South Africa, they got X-ray machines, like in most countries. Government buildings, you go in, you put your bag in the X-ray machine, it goes on a conveyor belt, checks your bag. And I understand the risk that they're managing. They don't want you to take a weapon or a bomb or whatever into the building. Fine. But if you leave the building, they X-ray the bag again. So what risk are they controlling? Maybe they think, I got a gun in the building and I'm now taking it out. Come on! So why are they using the X-ray machine 2 ways? Because somebody found out this is bidirectional. How amazing is this? So we can use it for bags coming in and out without anybody ever being able to tell me, why are you X-raying bags leaving? So we should relentlessly question all our controls and ask them, what risk are we actually managing through this control? And is this control effective in managing that risk? Okay. This is Earth calling risk management. What your risk management process should always be valid within the context of your current organization. I once did an exercise which was aligned to BCI, business continuity, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So we did a business impact analysis. And, you know, look at the risk for systems, what can take the systems down. And then one of the participants looked at me and they said, where are you coming from? Do you realize that process is not working at the moment? Now, you want to do a business impact analysis to protect it against future risk. But right now, it's not working. So, what are you talking about? Are you crazy? And this is where I'm talking about risk management also within a fragile economy. Your risk management should be appropriate. It's not just business as usual. Firstly, by the way, if you did the risk management well, you would have equipped the organization with resilience to be able to weather this poor economic climate. But if you're in there, regardless of how you got there, your risk management needs to be appropriate to the organization now. Don't just carry on business as usual. We risk management. We're doing business as usual. The organization is falling apart amongst us, but we do risk management. You need to make sure that your risk management process is always appropriate to where the organization is right now. If you are a highly stable organization, highly sophisticated, then you start focusing on small risks, etc. If it's a question of the sailing on the Titanic, then it doesn't really make sense to say, let's do a proper risk analysis on where to put the desk chairs. Okay, conclusion. I tried to identify some examples of the risks of risk management. Even if none of these examples apply to you, if I manage to get you to think about the risks of risk management, to say, maybe I should do a risk analysis on my risk management process, then I will be well satisfied. Thank you very much. Okay, if you have any difficult questions, I'll ask my colleague Johan at the back to answer them.
Thank you. Thank you, Jimmy, for this exciting presentation. Just there was a video going viral a few days back about some consultant or bright mind. He said, engineers, they don't really make good businessmen because they always think, put the problem before the opportunity. Speaking on this context, I believe being as a risk manager or in the risk management, if you put all these risks, is there a conflict between the risk management and the business objectives, marketing objectives, and who will put the control, the middleman? Because there is always risk, there are always exposures, but what about the opportunities that even sometimes contradict on what's going on?
Okay. And I think obviously all risks have not been created equal. Some risks are more important than others. So that's the first thing that you need to do. It also has to do with your risk appetite. How much risk are we willing to tolerate in a specific instance? It may be that you say, as an investment house, we are comfortable. Yes, we know that's a risky investment, but as an investment house, we are comfortable with taking risks because that's the only way to get high yield returns. So that's why I talk of risk optimization and not risk minimization. Risk minimization, I've got my tablet on the table there. If I want to minimize the risk to that tablet, what do I do with it? No, it could still drop, and it has happened. So if I really want to minimize the risk to that, the first thing I do is I take super glue and I block all the ports. And I disable the Wi-Fi so I can't get viruses from the internet, and then I put it in the vault. Now I've minimized the risk. What have I done in the process? The context is lost. I've destroyed the value. So yes, it's always a balance. And therefore, the ultimate decision is a business decision. To say, okay, let's not gloss over risks. By the way, risk denial is not a strategy. It's not one of the 4 ways in which you treat risk. So take full cognizance of the risk, listen to the black hat engineers, and then say, yes, I hear what you're saying. I'm evaluating this risk. Given the returns, I'm still going to accept this risk. Or I'm going to take some actions to mitigate the results of the risk or whatever. But don't ignore the risks, but don't let the risk paralyze you. That's the other thing. But if they say engineers don't solve problems, it means they are in that mode of, we don't want to hear the bad news. You want to hear the bad news and then take that into consideration in making your decision. And by the way, if they say engineers don't solve problems, they don't know lawyers. Okay, sorry about any lawyers here. Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. I just want to give a context, so just for me to get it clear. So I'm just talking from where I come from. Nicely you have said, you explain the governance, who owns the risk owner and everything. So if we got functional or business,
Yeah.
and then we have a risk management department, then we have a management. Now those high risk, who should be the owner of the high risk after the assessment, that has been going on? Is it the higher management? Is it even the board? Or it's the business owner? Or it's the risk management department?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Right. The answer to that is never the risk management department. Never. Because those are not your risks. The risks are a line management responsibility. So if there are risks that are of material effect to the organization, the board needs to know about these risks, and what they then need to do is they need to hold people accountable for fixing those risks. And they need to get a follow-up report to say, has this risk been mitigated? But it should be very rare, if ever, that they say, risk management, you have to fix this. Because it's not your risk. You don't own the risk. You should provide the reports, provide the metrics, provide the information needed, and if need be, you can consult with the manager in terms of what is the best tactic for doing this. So you can provide specialist advice, consulting, but you are not accountable. Khalas. Okay, that's it. Stunned silence. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed being able to speak to you.